like to call the school board meeting for December 8, 2015 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Ms. Langford?
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn?
Here.
Ms. Anderson? Here. Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Caldwell-Johnson?
Here.
Ms. Newcomb?
Here.
Ms. Boson?
Here.
First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Newcomb. Please vote. Is that button, Terry?
There you go. Sorry.
Votes approved 7-0. Next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from November 17th, 2015.
I second.
Motion by Ms. Newcomb, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is district recognitions. We have none this evening. So I'll move to consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determination as deemed necessary. We appreciate your input. Ms. Langford, I believe, do you have the motion?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with a recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $9,624,165.87, and P-card transactions in the amount of $614,760.01.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We have a speaker to the consent agenda. And ask Christina Harwell to approach the podium.
Thank you for your time. What I wanted to say in regards to my son, Jalen Miles, is what I wrote down is what brings us to this meeting is my concern for our son's education, or the lack thereof. Our son, Jalen Miles, has attended Des Moines Public Schools for 3 years now, one of which has been at high school level. Excuse me. From what I personally witnessed at East High School, behavioral standards are extremely lacking, and at a school where almost 3,000 students basically have free reign to do as they wish, do as they will, and the restrictions imposed upon the faculty's responses are left hapless and helpless to intervene most times. As a parent, we send our children to school with the unspoken pretense that they will be safe from harm, and to learn with the hopes that they will be guided and inspired along the way. No parent, myself included, sends our children to school and expects them to be mistreated, bullied, or threatened by those who choose to brandish guns on or near school grounds. The children at East High School aren't managed nor supervised with any type of acceptable authority. Every lunch period of every school day, 1/3 of the student body is released upon the community at large and is allowed to leave the school grounds per their open campus policy. This leaves approximately 600 immature, irresponsible youths left on their own unsupervised devices for the better part of an hour, 3 times a day, every day. And it is my understanding that this policy appears across the board for all Des Moines public schools at high school level. And as a parent, concerned for my child's safety, I find that to be utterly unacceptable, because my son has been a victim of threatening his life. There was a shooting at East High School in the middle of October where my son was the target. I shouldn't have to worry about my son's safety. And I would very much like for you to approve this open enrollment application so that we have more control over our son's safety and our son's education. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion by Ms. Langford and a second by Ms. Ellsburn. Is there any discussion?
Agenda item at this point? Amend the movement?
We cannot amend the agenda once we've approved the agenda as a board.
Okay.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda, and that item is included on the consent.
I know. Okay.
So at this time, because I read this statement before those parents came to challenge that open enrollment, at this point, it's off the table for discussion?
No. So our first vote was a vote to approve the agenda before you made your motion to approve the consent items. So it wasn't the motion that you made; it was the motion, the vote, the very first vote of the evening.
If we wanted to remove something from consent, we would have done it during the approval of the agenda.
Well, that would bit me in the butt.
I can say, because I know that there's understandably unease among the board to vote against an open enrollment request by a parent who fears for the safety of their child. And I spoke to two other parents who are here tonight who are in a similar scenario, and that we can request that because our options are rather limited in terms of voting yes or no on the consent agenda, as we have approved it already. We can, knowing that the administration has definitely reviewed all the evidence presented to them, but we could ask that the administration take another look at those items while we're voting to accept the recommendation to decline the open enrollment request. And I think that's not out of bounds. I would ask the superintendent
Sure.
to give another look at each of these cases.
And then how would we find out about that? After the review, I guess.
We would tell you.
You tell us, okay.
Well, and I think that to the extent that after review, a different recommendation would be made, that would come back to the board for a vote anyway, because we've actually,
Right.
we would, if we vote tonight, it will vote to support the staff recommendation, which is denial. So if after review, there is some consideration for a change, then it would come back to this board for a subsequent vote.
That would be accurate.
So with that understanding that the board can vote to approve the consent agenda items, declining this evening the open enrollment requests, with the understanding that the administration will take another look at them, review all evidence without bias or predetermination by the board, I will ask, is there any more discussion on the consent agenda tonight?
I think it's clear.
Okay, please vote.
I know, I saw.
Motion passes 6-1. Our next item on the agenda is item E1, a public hearing for secure entry at Brody Middle School. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, secure entry at Brody Middle School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Would the superintendent please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review and approve the proposed plans and specifications prepared by DLR Group for a new entry at Brody following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve?
Move approval.
Motion by Ms. Bose and a second by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson. We have a presentation tonight by Mr. Good.
Very brief one. Good evening. Yes, tonight we're here to present the final plans for office entry renovation at Brody. This is the existing plan of Brody. Up is north and down is south. This is the main entry currently. Thank you. And west is over here. So this is the main entrance currently to Brody, and the main thing we want to solve here is create a more secure front door to Brody Middle School, much like you've seen with some of the other projects that have been proposed recently. So this is the current library. So reference points, the current library, and you'll be able to see where that's going to be. This is the current office area here. We do have a secure entry at this point, but it's remote from the office. This is the proposed floor plan. The orange color would be in the form of an addition to the front of the building. And this area, which will be the renewed or what will be the new office area, was the library, which will be moved across the hallway over here. This is that main entrance vestibule, which will be completely locked down during the day. And this will become the entrance into to Brody Middle School here. This will be a secure vestibule. Before anyone, parent or visitor, can come into the school, there'll be a need to be identified and have a badge of some sort. And once that happens, they can go down this little corridor here to go into the school facility. A lot of support area offices. This is, as you can see, the principal's office, main secretary. This library media center, which is basically the old office area, will get quite an upgrade, and we're working on layouts now for a unique library setting. This just shows with the existing drive, the Horseshoe Drive on the south side of Brody. This would be the new entry area and how it relates to that drive. Won't get too, I guess I would point out, this is what that new entry will look like. So this will be the first impression that visitors have of Brody. Again, as mentioned, it's approved entrance to the school through the office area. That'll be a nice upgrade since we're moving the library across the hallway, and some improved office support spaces. This is the timeline. Should the board approve these tonight, construction would start in June, and it is our plan to be completed by August of 2016. And the project budget is $1 million, and again, this is another year one of our statewide penny plan. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions or discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on the agenda is item E2, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at McKee Preschool. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E2, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at McKee Preschool? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled partial roofing replacement at McKee Preschool following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, a second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is item E3, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at Oak Park Elementary School. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to E3, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at Oak Park Elementary School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent, please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled partial roofing replacement at Oak Park Elementary following the public hearing.
May I have a motion and a second to approve?
I second.
Motion by Ms. Bozen, second by Ms. Langford. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is item E4, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at East High School. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E4, public hearing for the partial roof replacement at East High School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled partial roofing replacement at East High School following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Ellsburn, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote.
Excuse me.
Sorry. Gaveled instead of voted. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is item E5, masonry restoration at Meredith Middle School. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E5, masonry restoration at Meredith Middle School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled masonry restoration at Meredith Middle School following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, second by Ms. Ellsburn. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is item E6, public hearing for the masonry restoration at Hannawald Elementary School. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to the masonry restoration at Hannawald Elementary? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled masonry restoration at Hannawalt Elementary School following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve?
Motion. Second.
Motion by Ms. Bozen, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is item E7, public hearing for the masonry restoration at East High School.
That's right.
That's right. Oh, God, thanks. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to masonry restoration at East High School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. The superintendent, please introduce the matter.
I recommend the board review and approve the plans and specifications prepared for the scheduled masonry restoration at East High School following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Ellsburn, second by Ms. Anderson. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Cumulatively, the motion's passed 49-0. Next item on our agenda is item F1, FY 2017 budget parameters. May I please have a motion and a second to approve item F1?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Bozen, a second by Ms. Langford. Do we have a, first, do we have a presentation? Or-
No, we don't have a presentation.
Not a presentation, no.
All right, I'll open it for discussion.
Mr. Chair, I'm passing around a document that, actually, I apologize for not getting it to you sooner, but after having met with a couple of my board colleagues, there were a few proposed additions to the parameters, and I don't know that they're necessarily additions. I think they're really meant to sort of lift up a couple of key points under some of those parameters that are already included in the document that the staff has prepared for our consideration. And I think without exception, much of what's included here, I think, is really reflective of ways that we can not only adopt the existing parameters, but look at those parameters through a lens of specificity around a few areas that several of us think might be helpful as we begin to set our sights on our fiscal 2017 budget. So I'd be happy to go over these. Everybody can read them, but a couple of things around operational efficiency and effectiveness. We think that there may be some opportunities to identify cost-saving strategies and collaborative opportunities with the city, and I know the superintendent and also our board president has met with the mayor and also the city manager. So being able to sort of reflect back on opportunities that might exist for creating some efficiencies across those governments is something that we'd definitely like to recommend the board consider as part of this parameter. Improve parent and stakeholder engagement. We've already talked about this, and it's included in the original document, but to really engage stakeholders through the efforts of creation of an Office of Engagement that would really be an opportunity for us to utilize our budget resources to really address in a more deliberate and intentional sort of way engagement strategies. Focus on strategies to close the achievement gap, dropout prevention, and graduation rate. Those are all sort of already included in the parameters. And the recommendation there is to invest resources in the implementation of the Young Men of Color Initiative, which was launched, I believe, July of last year. It's an initiative of the Council of the Great City Schools, and I think our district adopted the resolution and the protocols, so really looking to invest in that in a way to not only address academic achievement, but also dropout prevention and graduation. And then finally, one of the other parameters is keeping our board beliefs front and center in our work. And two of the recommendations there is increased investment in the equity office and related district equity efforts. Right now, I think we have really sort of one person that's assigned that responsibility. And if we begin to think about equity across the district, trying to identify additional resources that might really be able to not only illuminate that work, but also spread that work across the entire district in ways that we don't necessarily have it staffed to do right now. And then finally, review the district wages and benefits to address the challenge of low-wage employees. And I know that so many of our employees are covered by a bargaining unit, and so we're sort of limited by the opportunities that really allow us to address that in a really sort of head-on way. But as our community begins conversations around the notion of poverty elimination, it's critically important that one of the largest employers in this city begin to think about ways that we can support the needs of our low-wage employees. So those would be the things that Natasha, Heather, and I would like to advance for consideration. And I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, but those are the things that we discussed. And then there are other things on here that we thought would be helpful as we're sort of moving into budget to make sure that we understand, based on the previous parameters that have been established, ways that we can utilize previous activities to inform future work of this board around what actually happened with the parameters that were previously approved, and then work sessions that we think might be helpful for the board, especially the new board members, to get up to speed as we begin to move into budget deliberations.
So for purpose of clarification, the bolded items that are on your sheet, and I apologize to the folks at home that are unable to see what we're looking at. Those are all reflected within the proposed budget parameters that the administration brought to us. Are you proposing then to add the sub-bullets, there's I believe 5 of those, to that document, or raise those up as guidance to the administration? Like, what's the
Well, I think as we were putting this together, we didn't want to stray too far from previous documents that we have used, recognizing that those are sort of the cornerstone for the parameters that we've had in the past. And so the sub-bullets are really meant to, I think, help push the envelope on things that we think might be helpful as those additional 4 items are sort of brought forth from the administration. So I guess it really, I don't know that we necessarily have to approve them separately, but I definitely think as the budget is being put together, to definitely utilize those as guidance, very similar to what we would be doing with all of the other parameters. I don't know that we have a level of specificity with any of them, but certainly trying to help sort of lift up key areas where we think there may be an opportunity for us to maybe think differently, to think more boldly, to think more aggressively, I think is what we had intended with those.
Could the sub-bullets be something that might be recommended as we look at priorities versus parameters?
Certainly possible.
You know, prioritizing those
Yep.
things versus, or some format of that, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we intended this to be sort of a jumping off point for engaging in a much more rigorous conversation around what those items mean and how they translate. You know, in the past, we've just sort of left it open with operational efficiency and effectiveness without sort of saying what that is or how we might approach that or how we might pursue that. So I think this is an attempt to really sort of frame those in a way that gives a little more substance beyond just a very broad, very general heading.
Sure.
I guess I always thought that the parameters were the more broad heading. When the budget came to us, we would have the work sessions where we'd get more specific. And I appreciate the work you did, but just to get it like right now, it's hard to, put it all in context with what we had our minutes or were on agenda. I appreciate you guys met on your own and came up with these, but I would like to stick to the broader parameters now for me personally, so that we can see when we come back and have work sessions, we can get more specific on things. Because in any of these, whatever, if we want more increased equity office, then what else, does that impact something else? So I think we have to be very cognizant of that as the overarching parameters. Then every individual thing, a bullet point you put in will affect something else. So I think that's a discussion within the budget, not the budget parameter for me.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I feel more comfortable.
And I don't know that we want to change anything. I think the comment was really to provide guidance based on some things that we think might be important as we begin to think about how we prioritize our spending moving into next year. Again, I think in the past we've sort of relied on staff to identify the efficiencies or the effectiveness strategies or other things that sort of fit more broadly under those categories. And I think this is an attempt to interject board thought and board deliberation into how they may want to approach some of these. So that was our attempt to try to get something in addition to those very broad categories in front of us so that as they're contemplating the budget, to maybe think about how those things may be included and whether or not there are trade-offs, because we know that in every budget year there are going to be trade-offs. So I think it's just an attempt to really sort of push the envelope on some things that we think may be important as we begin to think about these broader categories.
Ms. Boson?
I appreciate that again, but I think that's a total board discussion, which becomes into our board sessions that we were talking about, a work session. We're all at the table where we can all come up with we can talk the individual bullet points in a greater detail. Because I could probably add more specific things that I would see too. So I think that's where we need to have it in the work sessions, which we had talked about scheduling more of them. I appreciate what Terry said in the past, but we never had as many work sessions as we probably should have had if you wanted to have more questions answered. So I think that the question or the work sessions that they had contemplated, I think we need to get on the books right now and have more informative meetings so we can come along the process and bring up what would be the way if you do this versus that or whatever. And that to me belongs in the work session parameters or the overarching. Then within the work session, we would get to the more specific. So I would project that we get the board's meeting scheduled for the additional time that we need if we want more specific input.
I'm perfectly fine with that. I think this is, again, an attempt to sort of accelerate our thinking so that we're not reacting to something that we haven't had the benefit of having input on, but rather reacting to something that really fits with those things that we think are important from a budgetary perspective.
Additional discussion?
I just want to be clear as to what we're proposing to do is to, at this moment, to vote on the budget parameters and then revisit as a board at a work session, looking more maybe at priorities that we have raised here. Correct? Just want to make sure.
That's what's been recommended.
Okay.
Yep, I believe that's what we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any further discussion of the proposed board budget parameters for 2017? Ms. Langford?
Just a follow-up question. So when we do, so typically in the past, how the boards function, you all get your parameters, you approve your parameters, and then you do have typically annual work sessions where you're really looking at, all right, we have this idea underneath operational efficiencies and effectiveness, and no.
It's not necessarily how we've done it in the past. We usually react to what the staff brings back to us, as opposed to setting our specific priorities for what we'd like to have considered in the budget.
Okay.
Staff and recommendations from the Employees Budget Advisory and Citizens
and the
Budget
citizens.
Advisory, and from our management limitations and all of the policy that we've set already.
Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, and I think I think just being a new board member, we just wanted to know a little bit more, and as Connie said earlier, we weren't having those work sessions, and again, being new, not knowing how, that's set up in the past or now. I mean, we have now had one or so, but they haven't been particularly maybe what maybe I needed at that time. And I'm learning more, so I'll know from now, especially if we have the work sessions that are more targeted, I guess.
So I think what it sounds like, when we looked at the budget planning calendar a couple of meetings ago, that was our opportunity at that time to ask for more budget work sessions and such, and get those on the calendar. I think that's what Connie was talking about as well. So as a board, we have every opportunity to start scheduling those work sessions anytime we want, and from back then to now. So I think it would be wise, as Connie mentioned, let's get some on the calendar, and err on the side of too many, and change it if we decide differently.
Yeah. I think when we looked at the budget calendar, we had some months where we had to be determined. So I think we've got it to be determined now. We've got to set those.
Yeah. No, that's why I brought up, I think even the last time, is just not even put a time in. If we don't need it, then we can cancel it. But because a lot of people are new, that we needed to go ahead and schedule it now and not wait and see where we're at. So, and I think there was maybe one for this month. So I think that that's where, when we had that discussion, we should have said, we want those, we need those, or we want more. And so that's where, as a board, we can do that. And I think, you know, I would recommend that we do one possibly even before the holidays if we could, and go into January, or whatever people's pleasure is on that.
And I will interject here that, yes, we did on that calendar have a board work session on the budget set for December, this December. So tomorrow at our agenda planning meeting with Tom and Thomas, Terry and I can come up with a couple times to do that, and we can start getting to more substantive aspects of the budget.
I was just going to add, for me, when, you know, I guess looking at this particular issue on the agenda, to have discussion about this parameters, that's why I assumed it would be the great time to bring it up and have an opportunity to kind of provide what I would like to start visioning the district being. So that's where the input is in on that. So that's my frame of thought as to why it came about in this manner. Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Langford.
Okay. Just another clarifying question. So really what we're looking at when we're talking about how this has differed, or what we're proposing that this will differ from how we've looked at board parameters in the past, is the board taking a more active role in developing the means to the outcomes that we create.
Relative to board parameters, no, that's
Priorities.
not the, yeah.
The
Parameters, the parameters are broader, and are really the board giving the district an idea of where we want them to go when they start
Yes.
getting to the much deeper level of detail than we ever will be. And then what we're talking about right now is then investing our time and effort into both understanding the ingrained programs and priorities within the budget, which I think has always happened, but then also having deeper discussion about what our priorities are and should be, and how we would like to see them reflected. And so I think that's a multi-stage conversation that can start as soon as we start making progress through our timeline here. And so tonight's aspect was getting that budget parameter document set, and then we can start on the treadmill after that.
Thank you.
Further discussion?
Yeah,
Newcomb.
I've got a number of questions on the 15% solvency ratio, and they're written down, so I suppose I could go down them. All right. Of course, I realize that the 15% that's there is not something that's replenished. We take time to build that up. Let's see. To get to that 15% over the years, I know you guys sacrificed quite a bit and had some planning. I'm curious to where the 15% came from to build up that fund?
It's really just a matter of not spending as much relative to what was available to spend.
Okay, in my understanding, the silos of budgeting, could it only come from a particular budget?
Well, yeah, the general fund,
Just the
which
general
is a combination of several funds, but it's like, it excludes the statewide penny, for instance.
Okay.
The PEPAL fund, and,
Well, oh, yeah, and it also excludes SPED, ELL. So if you think about all.
Yeah, the categorical.
All those categorical funds, basically. So it's really, if you really want to think about it, over 5 years or whatever the time frame is, what we were able to do was the money that we had coming in, our expenditures did not exceed the revenues that we came in. So in other words, we actually kind of ran surpluses. And so that's what built this solvency ratio up. Yeah, right. And so it was not like we did not, we were not making investments because for those of you who was on the board, we made significant things occur. We just,
Yeah.
it was just, I think we just managed it significantly. And to one of your other questions, one of the things we focused on, we focused on the solvency ratio, but there's a companion ratio that kind of goes with that. And if you remember Larry Siegel, when he was talking about, there was two pieces you get a balance.
Yeah.
That's the spending authority. Now, and that's even more significant than the solvency ratio, because if we don't manage the spending authority, and the only way the spending authority grows is our enrollment has to be growing, or we're getting more than 1.25 in supplemental aid, or we get a windfall, Mark Zuckerberg or somebody gives us some of his money, basically. So that's the only way that grows, okay? Otherwise, if we were to spend more than the revenues that are coming in, you begin to eat down that built up spending authority, and then you get in this cycle. Even though you have money, i.e., like Davenport, i.e., like some of the districts right here in
West Des Moines.
West Des Moines, you can't spend it because your spending authority or your budget cap, the way I like to think about it, is going down. So although we have actually focused, and for good reason, on having a sound solvency ratio, we also have to maintain to make sure our spending authority stay where it is. Okay.
Yep. Guess I didn't address spending authority in any more questions, so I apologize. When you decide to spend these funds, because they have been accessed before, right? If I remember correctly?
They're currently being accessed, as a matter of fact.
Yes. What kind of considerations are considered?
Well, that's a
Vocabulary.
good question. Really, what it really boils down to is this isn't exact. We can't say we're going to hit. We could, I guess, we could do that and hit it, but it wouldn't make very much sense. So one of the things that is very problematic and why we feel it's important to keep it in that range is, and this will likely you'll likely experience this year, because our veteran board members have experienced every year they've been on the board, with possible exception of maybe Terry and Connie years ago, but we'll have to certify a budget before we even know what supplemental state aid is and before contract negotiations are completed. So we're, to a large degree, shooting in the dark. So last year, we guessed high on supplemental state aid because we only got 1.25%. So because we had a healthy solvency ratio and balanced with our spending authority, we were able to pretty much go on with our plan without having to make any, cuts or reductions. And we dipped down to 13, was it 13.6 or 13.2 or whatever. So it's really setting the course and sticking with the course, which is going to become more and more difficult to do if the state doesn't come through with with a higher. But when it happens year after year, if you don't have that cushion, then we actually start digging a hole deeper because we've reduced it. Because then we start having to borrow money, pay interest on the money that we borrowed so we can make payroll, operating expenses, and then it actually becomes harder and harder to actually climb out of that.
Okay, I just want to restate what I believe I heard. This currently, there isn't necessarily a standard to access or certain questions for when you decide to use this fund.
Well, it's not a separate fund. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
The reserves.
Yeah.
Because the standard is just keeping with the plan, because it's not going to affect. Okay.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Of my question?
Of your
Clarify
question or what you all are saying? Like, because
I need my interpreter.
I'll try. So we hit 13, we're at about 13 now. but there are moments in time.
Well, actually, we're much lower than that right now, but
Okay.
at the end of the year, we
But-
closed it at about
But
13.2.
it's a flow,
Yeah.
and so were we not to have that cushion, there are times where we, to cover payroll and expenses, we draw from that, so it's essentially there, we draw on it versus having to borrow outside of it. And so it fluctuates and sometimes probably close to nothingness.
It can be, you know, for example, the low point, you know, is September, you know, and if you think about it, when we're talking about the solvency ratio, but it's just one portion of our fund balance because, and so the way I think about it is that is the first thing that we spend, you know, because that's unrestricted. It has no tails tied to it. And so when I say the low point, when I think about it, even though we still have some cash left over, because those are the restricted funds, those are the categorical funds that are earmarked, we spend
The spending.
every penny of that because, I mean, if you just simply do the math, you know, and look at the size of our expenditure budget or our budget, how much we spend each month, basically. So, yeah.
So we go from, is our last payment in May, and then from the state, and then
From
the
the
first
state.
one is in November?
Actually, we get a payment from the state in September, and we get a tax payment in October. But I'm telling you, in the middle of October, we have blown. I shouldn't use the term blown, but that's the term that's financial people use. We have spent through the cash. I mean, we spent through that solvency rate. Whatever that amount is, and I think, and that's about $43 million. I mean, we spent that and then some. So it's, I mean, if I were to have to calculate a solvency ratio at that particular point, it'd be 0 or, you know, or negative, basically.
Is ready for my next one? Okay. All right. As we even heard just this evening, and we've heard since we've been on the board, and I'm sure it's nothing new, really, the conversations around student achievement. And I know that we would like to make some improvement and strides in that. Would it not be prudent for us to consider lowering that ratio to address some of those issues when we see that there's a critical need? And if so, what would that look like one way or the other? If we did and did not, is there a correlation of spending and not spending those funds, essentially?
Well, if we had absolute certainty about what our funding would be moving forward, then I would be in support of that, but we don't. And so when we start getting some momentum going, like I believe we have going now, if we don't manage that and we get to a point where we have to slash and burn, like some of our board members experience, you slow everything down. Everybody's looking over their shoulder thinking, you know, what's the next shoe that's going to drop, and you lose progress. Stability in these change efforts is hugely important to get the gains that we want to get. So the relatively small amount that we would get in one time, and then the risk that puts us in to maintain the investments that we've already made is very tricky business.
Okay. Well,
I was just gonna say, didn't we already kind of do that we put the expenditure in more technology and things like that? We took money, we were able to do that we wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't had it. So there are things there are priorities that if we have to lower, then they have taken it to. But again, and so much of it is, you know, it's got to be on that one-time thing. You know, what is the one time? But the consistency and having the ability not to, when you have a cross-the-board cut or whatever, the amount of time that people take off the ball of academics because they're worried about money and financing, where you have a cushion, then you're able to ride the storm a little bit. And it doesn't take long to make a storm.
no, that was exactly what I was thinking when I asked, like, how we determined the funds were used. And so okay, that was in the plan. Since it is uncertain if after this legislature meets and the governor passes, some allowable growth. Sorry, I know it is allowable growth.
That's okay. We all know what you're
It will
talking
always
about.
be allowable growth, I understand.
Would we have an opportunity to revisit if needed that solvency ratio, or is this a one-time thing?
Well,
for the
it's,
board?
we can revisit it, but the thing is, looking at it only 1 year at a time doesn't really change the dynamic.
Right.
So once you get it to, say, 15% or whatever we set as the target, once it's there, we'll keep it there. Until you know, we run into some financial challenge, and then that's when it pulls back down. So to look at 1 year and say, okay, this year we've determined we can spend it down, we've actually worked against ourselves, because then the next year, that cushion that we want is gone already.
That's, I guess, what I was referring to, is if we find ourselves in a position where we have zero allowable growth, I would imagine be in a financial challenge and position, so would we not revisit at that point then?
Well, and again, this is to the
mean,
point
it's
about being a
speculation.
parameter. It's actually a parameter, and we went down,
Yeah,
you know, this year, and it wasn't, that wasn't in the parameters. I think the board understands we made a very good effort to keep it there, but with 1.25% allowable, or, now you have me saying that, I finally taught myself supplemental state aid.
sorry.
You know, we could have hit 15%, and we would have had to do some disruption to good things that were going on. And so, you know, we tried to be prudent, but it did get spent down to 13, whatever it is, 2 or 6.
And I think that the converse on Natasha's question here really too is, in the alternative universe where we actually do better on state aid than we're expecting, there is then opportunity to maybe address one-time needs if we're above that
Right.
number, and if we feel it's sustainable to stay
Right.
to spend that.
Yeah, and then we have more to,
You know,
more to
and
work with.
unfortunately,
more
that's,
investment to make.
you know, we have the wrong governor and in State House to expect that outcome, but that reality is ostensibly there if things go a different way.
Yeah, there's
All right,
more money coming
I was going to mention, not to be a total party pooper, but I think on December 7th, it came, or December 2nd, it came out that they're looking at 175
175 million.
million
The
in
whole
new,
state.
for the whole state, in new money calculated at 65% to education, probably means less than 1% for us, and probably earmarked, because when he
leadership.
foreshadowed that pretty well with his STEM and
Yeah.
TL, so.
Yeah, so what I would, you know, say is if we end up getting 1% or less than 1%, I think we'll be able to keep on going, but that solvency ratio is going to go down. I mean,
No, I understand
yeah.
that it's.
And the only reason we're able to be in a position to do that is because when we had those 2 consecutive 4% allowable growth years, the board used that opportunity to get us in a position where, instead of spending it all down, let us stay on a relatively even plane and continue with the initiatives that we have going on without really losing much momentum.
Yep. I just want to make sure that I'm balancing the student needs with that ratio, or the solvency
Absolutely.
ratio. No need for us to prosper if the students are not, so, okay, thank you.
And not to be not to necessarily change the subject, I think probably one of the things that we do have some rather wonderful things long-term that we actually have started and have invested in, basically. So I don't want you to think that we have not just been bankers here and just trying to make the districts out, basically. I mean, because if you think about in the 4 or 5 years, we made some huge investments that we think that will pay off in the not too distant future, in the near future, basically. So,
No, and
okay. But I just want to put some context around
Sure,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, put some
It's
context around
complicated.
that.
I mean,
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard because they're all priorities, you know,
Yeah.
when you hear that number and it sounds great, but then you realize that at some point in time, you go down to zero.
Yep.
I mean, it's that fluctuation. It's a very, school finance is interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Those are.
Thank you. Please, Ms. Caldwell-Johnson.
And this is maybe just an idea that might help people to really sort of put the solvency ratio in a much better context. Would it be possible to maybe chart where we are in the course of a year, especially given where we know we have some significant challenges from a cash flow perspective during that May-November timeframe? And I think that might just sort of help people to better understand visually what that 15% means and how it is used throughout the year to sort of help cover our needs. I'm not for sure that it's necessarily going to address the issues of whether or not it should be 15%, but it certainly will help people to better understand the context in which that fund is used to help manage the financial needs of the district.
Right, I would definitely do that.
I agree with that. I'd like to see it, like how far it goes down and what happens, and maybe the last couple years even. Has it been at 15? How long has it been set at 15?
About 2012, 2013, but it took us a while to actually get
Okay.
there, to get there basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to raise up one more change in what the district has presented to the board tonight, which is an increase in unspent spending authority,
Right.
which has been 10% in prior fiscal years, and you're suggesting 15% now. Right?
Yes.
Can you speak to that change, please?
Well, a couple things. When I look at not only last year, but kind of looking like everybody else does, and I don't see much change until something happened either in the governorship and in the House. And then again, it may not change. And I go back to what I said earlier. I mean, you have to have increasing enrollment, a reasonable supplemental aid that's coming in, and some other source of miscellaneous revenue, whether it be new grants or whatever, for that spending authority to increase. The other thing that has to happen is you cannot continue to spend more than your expenditures cannot exceed your revenues, basically, because whatever spending authority that you built up, you will start spending that down. And so, given that, we've been at 10%. Ever since then I've been here, and I think it took us a while to actually get to 10% because back in the day I think it was in a constant cut mode, but every year basically. I see a need basically for us to kind of stay in that, here again, it's a target, not necessarily that we're going to get there, in this fiscal year or next fiscal year, but we need to begin to build that up because we have begun to burn. We went from something like a solvency ratio about 20, not solvency, but a spending authority from about 20%, down to I think it's right around about 11 or 12%, which means that we're spending more than we're bringing in, basically. And so we can't continue to do that. So looking forward, I want us to start either from a planning standpoint to build that in. So then that's one of the parameters that we'll pay close attention to when we produce a budget, basically, which means that, a lot of the things that on that list that you guys had, we're going to be talking about, things we need to abandon, things we need to evaluate, things we need to,
The reason Thomas and I wanted to add this is because if you all as a board are looking at solvency ratio and not at all about spending authority, we can meet those parameters and still get us into a problem. So we thought, let's lift that up too, so that it's both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
So we don't lull ourselves into a false sense of stability or security without having, and we haven't before, and it's kind of a pain because it's a complicated thing to explain, but it's very important. And I think probably some districts probably haven't looked at that as closely as they might.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote on the FY17 budget parameters. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is a discussion item on the district's legislative priorities. There's no action on this item. There's no presentation, but I'll open the floor for discussion or comment from the district.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see much of anything new here, with the possible exception of the conversation about the AEA dollars. We have made some progress in at-risk and dropout prevention in the last couple of years in terms of flexibility, but the foundational issue remains that the way the state allocates these dollars, it's tied to your enrollment number, not to your needs. So essentially, our students, regardless of their situation, generate the same amount of funding to address at-risk status and dropout risk as do students from any other district, including districts that have a virtually non-existent poverty rate and very low ELL rates. And so what we're trying to leverage is a discussion around the state that there needs to be more differentiation in how we fund our schools based on the needs that our students bring to school, instead of saying equal is fair. We would argue that it's not. So the ELL weighted funding, we had very good success a couple of years ago in moving from 4 years of weighted funding for ELL students to 5 years. As you may recall, the legislature passed that, so we now are receiving that 5th year of weighted funding, but when that 5th year was passed, instead of 3 additional years, they created a task force to study this issue, and the task force came back and not only said, yes, we should be provided weighted funding for 7 consecutive years, we should also be weighted at a higher level. 0.22 is not sufficient enough. So although that committee came back, or the task force came back with that recommendation, we were unable to get movement the following year. We think we need to continue to push on that and engage our partner districts, particularly those with a higher percentage of English language learners, to advocate, because there are small districts and large across the state that have this challenge disproportionate to the state average. So we think we have some good ammunition to continue to fight that, but we need to continue to lead that effort. And then funding for needs-based 4-year-old preschool. And that's, we can debate whether it should be universal pre-K, funding provided for that, or if it's needs-based, I quite frankly don't care. It's wherever we can get traction and get something done. We know we have about 1,000 students, 4-year-olds in our district every year that don't receive preschool services, and they are the students who most need preschool services. So needs-based would help us as a district significantly, help our community significantly. But again, if it's the board's will that we push for universal pre-K, I can certainly be fully supportive of that as well. So I guess that's all the commentary I'll make at this time, and let you all discuss or critique.
Can I ask a question?
Ms.
Why
Anderson?
are 1,000 students not receiving the pre-K because we can't accommodate them, or the money isn't there?
Yeah, the money's not there. Essentially, if they, how the state currently funds preschool, it's for only 10 hours a week, which means you can't do full days. We do more than 10 hours, the required 10 hours, because it works better for our families. But to provide transportation, it interferes with work. So some families who could qualify sometimes would have to quit their job to qualify. If we don't have enough funding, and there certainly is not anywhere near enough funding to do full day, it's impossible for the families to provide transportation and then also find daycare for the second half of the day. It's a logistical impossibility. So we certainly wouldn't have the capacity to add 1,000 students next year. But if it were in place that there were pre-K, certainly this board has demonstrated their willingness to support pre-K. Jesse Franklin Taylor, we built because we know there's a need, and we're going to be as close to ready. But right now, we could increase capacity significantly, especially if it were half day, because we still have capacity at McKee. We have a little bit more capacity at Jesse Franklin Taylor, and we could, we would aggressively pursue additional spaces. So I think we would be at the ready and probably much better positioned than many districts to accommodate that if it were to become a reality.
Thanks.
Ms. Belson?
As far as the preschool too, I am realist that, first of all, to get more funding is difficult, and I really think if we could address it on a needs-based, it gives purpose to hopefully getting more money, because the need is for all day, every day. And so I would leave the needs-based in it, and I am appreciative that you've added the AEA, because we went down this path when we were having the across-the-board cuts about, 4 or 5 years ago. And there's probably about $4 million differential between what we use. I don't know if it's the same amount.
There's probably closer to 7 million.
From what we use from our AEA versus what we receive, and I believe that we should be able to secure what we need, but then those dollars could be used because we provide that service. So I think it's a huge gap that we basically are, because of our population of students, help support all the other districts around us.
Yeah, it is. It's tied to the population we serve, but it's also tied to the size of our district. AEAs weren't set up to serve large districts, certainly not large urban districts, and that was recognized for half the formula when the AEAs were created, because Des Moines has never participated in the special education side of AEAs. So that's always been the case. It was recognized then, and what we're asking is that they recognize that the other half really doesn't work for us either. And those funds that are generated by our students shouldn't be used to subsidize the education of kids in Pella and Waukee and Adel DeSoto, Minburn. Yeah, nothing against those districts.
Ms. Langford?
Thank you. So when we're talking about needs-based, who determines that need? Is that a state decision or is that a district decision?
On that first item?
On that, when we're talking about funding for the legislative priorities, funding for needs-based 4-year-old preschool, and you were saying you advocate for needs-based.
Yeah, based on free and reduced, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's not
Some
currently.
measure that, whatever they, yeah.
But that's basically, we use the free and reduced lunch measure, or is that a state mandate?
The state uses it, but depending on which of the programs, because there's like 4 different state-funded preschool programs, it's some percentage of the poverty rate. So it might be poverty rate or below, but it might be 150% of the poverty rate, depending on which of the programs you're talking about. Which is another thing that we would really like to see too, is just simplification of the code, because we're juggling things all the time to piece together a comprehensive program for those students that we serve.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, on the preschool too, the universal money it doesn't matter. Every student is offered universal pre-K. So it's that, 10 hours a week? So it doesn't matter what your income, that's from the state, that's the universal pre-K. Then there's the Head Start, there's the different ones that have the price, just to give a little more clarification. So there is a group of students that get 10 hours, all students, 4-year-olds, if I understand right, get the 10 hours a week, if they choose to take it.
Okay.
Yeah, really, if they can afford to take advantage of it.
Right, so if you can afford to go pick up, of course, working people, it's hard to go pick your child up at 11:30 and all that, so, but there are a group of, all the state, that's that universal pre-K. And then there's all the other different programs that they have based different restrictions. And that, I think, would be another point that we might want to even add, that we streamline the process, because it's a juggling act, it's a spider web of trying, some kids are in this program based with part of the money here, part of the money there, they piece it together to give you all day. So I think that that would be another thing, is to simplify how we are delivering early childhood in the state, as far as streamlining all the programs and the funding sources that they come from and the different restrictions they all have.
So when we're talking about a debate of whether we want to champion for needs-based preschool, or needs-based or universal preschool, which we already have optional for all 4-year-olds, how does that differ? Does that mean that 4-year-olds would no longer then be receiving that universal childcare? We would be opting to advocate, or did I mishear that? I thought I heard you say that it's a debate between whether we want to champion for one or the other.
Do we want to champion that we want state support for kids that are from poverty, or do we want to make it available to everybody?
And you're saying, does it really matter?
I don't have a preference one way or the other, as long as we could get full day, as long as we could cover the gap so that everyone genuinely has access, and not just access in word only. Because the challenges that a lot of our families face, they really are forced into a lose-lose situation.
Sure.
I'll share just an anecdote. I was in one of our elementaries earlier this fall, and there was a young man who was in kindergarten and struggling a bit, really with socialization issues. And the principal went to go check on him, and I walked down the hall with the principal and the young man, and we had a nice little talk. And in asking the child how old he was, this was early in the fall. He said he was 5. He was actually 4, and he was going to turn 5 just in time to be eligible for kindergarten. And in talking with the principal after we visited with the student, I said, it doesn't appear that this young man's ready for kindergarten. And she said, no, he's not. And she talked with the mother at registration time about this young man, and she said, I know he's not ready, but it'll be a lot better than the daycare that I send him to, because I can't figure out a way to get him into preschool. And that's just a shame, because this is the perfect candidate. This young man was a perfect candidate for preschool, would have benefited immensely, been kindergarten ready when it was time for kindergarten, but mom didn't have that option, really. And so we're accommodating him as a kindergartner, even though he would be much more successful, as would the other kids that he's being served with, had he had the opportunity for high-quality preschool before attending kindergarten. And there are, lots of those stories in our district.
So it's just the legislative committee then determining what we're going to focus on? Or is that a work session discussion, or is that what we're discussing right now?
Yeah.
We're discussing right now. Yeah, really what we want to do is narrow the things that,
make it.
as a district, we're advocating for. So so we're not asking for everything under the sun. We can really focus our message around 2 or 3 things that we really think will impact us, help other districts as well, perhaps, but things that are more specific to Des Moines. When you look at the UEN or School Administrators of Iowa or Iowa State Education Association or Iowa Association of School Boards and look at their legislative priorities, it's difficult to understand what the priorities are, because there's typically a very long list, and the lists look very much the same, and it starts to sound like a bit of a broken record. And I think we'll be much more effective if we can have a couple of real priorities. There might be some overlap with some of the other educational organizations, but we all have a stronger voice if we have a much more succinct, precise message.
Ms. Posen?
I was going to say, even if we added the word expand funding for needs-based, but that just, I don't know if that would get the point that we want expanded funding, because they're going to say you have funding, so.
We don't anymore. We're at the end of our rope.
I know. So I'm just saying, if we would, the point of our legislative priority is that we want to expand the funding and, or we want additional funding is what
Not
we're,
just keep it.
right.
Ms. Langford?
Paulette, she'll add that, is what you recommend? Expanded funding for needs-based.
Yeah, whichever. Increased funding.
So currently, the district has a universal pre-K option for all 4-year-olds, optional, and oftentimes a major barrier from what we're saying is transportation, and work.
Well, transportation,
Work.
yeah,
Right.
and finding daycare where they'll accommodate you for only half a day.
Right, which I get. I
Yeah.
just wanted to, but so then, oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So we're saying, so when you talk about that 1,000 students who currently isn't receiving childcare, you're talking about the 1,000 4-year-olds in our city,
I'm saying they're not receiving preschool.
period.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, a lot of them are getting daycare of some sort, but they're
Right.
not getting high-quality preschool. Yeah.
right, okay. I was just trying to be clear, because if that encompassed more than the 4-year-olds, because right now we're saying we offer universal childcare for our 4-year-olds.
Preschool.
Preschool.
Yeah, I think
Universal
for,
preschool for our 4-year-olds.
yeah, the term universal preschool really refers to the funding that comes from the state, which was designed in a way to benefit any 4-year-old that opted to have it. So by definition is universal, but it's not like the thing that always irritates me is it's quite different than a year later when the kid's a 5-year-old and they get $6,000 some dollars that automatically come to them. It's quite different from that. The kid actually has to enroll in preschool and go to it, and so even though it's universal, there's still kids that we can't reach and have been unable to reach. Does that help?
Yes, so universal in
It's in
semantics,
name.
but yeah,
It
by
is
name only,
semantics,
but
yes,
not
it's
necessarily
semantics, yeah.
accessible for all of our people. And so we're saying we need more funding to make it truly accessible for all of the 4-year-olds.
And if you had all-day preschool classing.
That's not just 10
then It
hours.
would, by expanding the service, more people would take part of it.
But
We're saying
Because they could. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood what we were.
Yeah.
And even if it were some blended where we provided half-day and then didn't have to follow all of those restrictions and still provide them daycare for the second half of the day, it's some mechanism where we could keep them all day to get over that hurdle that's preventing so many of our families from taking advantage of universal, yeah.
It's not doable for people.
could I raise up a point though, because we've talked a little about this, but we haven't really answered the question of, so we're talking about expanding funding for 4-year-old preschool, and we're talking about it being needs-based. I don't think we've, as a board, said, yes, we want to change the way the dollars are allocated, which is really that's really the crux of the issue here, right? I mean, it's not necessarily being universal, but being more tied to.
Well, it's funding at a level that would allow us to remove the barriers that are preventing families from advantaging it now. For instance, our funding now for half-day, again, semantics, it's not really half-day, we receive less than half of the per-pupil funding that Rob referred to a few moments ago. And there are specific restrictions around how many students are allowed per teacher, associate support, how much space is needed, and so as they've reduced what they will provide for a half-day student over the last 5 years, they've increased what we're allowed to spend it on. Namely, we can provide transportation now with what is already insufficient dollars to provide the actual programming, so it really hasn't given us more flexibility. We could, if we had enough funding where we could keep our students for a whole day, even if it meant half a day of actual instruction as we currently do, and then a little less expensive option for the remainder of the day in more of a daycare, high-quality daycare kind of setting, that would help many of our families immensely. Wouldn't cover the transportation cost, but that would be another thing, you know, if we could get a little bit more and provide transportation. Transportation is, again, a little different discussion than our current transportation for K-12, because you have different rules that you need to follow for safe transport of children. But all of that could be in the mix.
I guess my point here is, so how many hours a week would be, so if we offer 10, we're funded by the state through universal pre-K for 10 hours a week.
Yeah, that's what they would say.
We
That's what
provide-
we're required to provide with the funding, yeah. We're
We
given.
provide 13 hours a week, right? It's roughly about 13
I think so,
hours.
yeah. I think it's 13, right around there, 12 and a half, something like that. Do you know, Cindy or Connie? I can't remember
Probably,
exactly.
yeah, 12 to
It's well above what we're required, yeah.
What would be the total hours a week of full-day preschool for 5 days? 30?
Yeah, right about 30.
Okay, so in order to get to universal pre-K full day, we're talking about tripling what's provided. Plus,
No, I wouldn't say triple, but
well,
more than double.
Yeah, I suppose it's cheaper to cover the next 20 hours per hour than it was to cover the first 10.
Sure.
But my point is, we're asking for substantially more funding.
Yes, but if it's not mandatory, there will still be some, you know, some folks who will not opt in.
Right.
But yeah, on a per pupil basis, yeah, it would be over twice
So
or around twice, depending on what the programming looked like.
what I'm confused is, are we asking for changes too in the way those funds are distributed in addition to that, or are we asking them, are you suggesting that they continue to be distributed at the same, and I'm talking about just this one pot of state early education dollars, to still be distributed at universal, or are we talking about limiting that to some measure of poverty, which makes it,
Yeah, I don't, I don't think I have a preference.
Okay.
Wherever we think the right leverage point is to be able to get some traction and get some improvement.
I think we should be, I don't know that we need to make a decision tonight, but I think that if we're gonna go up to the Hill, we should be somewhat intentional about
Oh, absolutely.
what we are asking for.
We need a
for
lot
this.
more detail for the discussions at the Hill, but
Yeah.
in spirit, if this is what the board
Because, I mean,
thinks we should.
what I'm addressing here is the pragmatism of this, whether, okay, maybe you're not gonna get this much, but, with some changes and additional funding, you can get to here. And I guess I wanna have some clarity in terms of what we're asking for, and Connie is dutifully raising her hand, so.
I was gonna say, I guess I would like to say that you keep the universal so that nobody changes, but if they're going to have more funding, we're asking for funding for kids that live in poverty and need it. So any additional funding over that universal money that they give would be targeted to the students that needed it. Because to get it just blanket universal, then I think that's where the needs come in. So that would be one recommendation, but that's just a point of discussion too, that's how you could address it fairly easily. If they qualify for free and reduced lunch, then they get this much more. They already have 10 hours, but we need possibly 20 hours. So this is how much it will cost to get the 1,000 kids that we know we're not being able to serve for some reason. And you might only pick up another 600 or 800, but you would be in a much better position. To me, this is the most critical, one of the achievement things we can do. And it's the most efficient and in the long run, less costly way for the state to do some true education reform.
Any further discussion? No. No, we are not. This is just a
It's
discussion.
a discussion item.
Yep.
It's a discussion item. So,
So then I'd imagine if anybody after tonight has more thoughts on how to wordsmith any of these or more direct thoughts on
You know,
how that would
Yeah.
look.
so I'm just going to sort of follow Rob's train of thought around the notion of trying to provide as much clarity and specificity as we must, especially around this one, because I think, sort of oftentimes left to their own devices, people at the Hill can,
Well, they've gotten
Do
us to this
crazy
point
things.
already, haven't they? Left to their
Yes.
own devices.
and I think that we have people that have sort of bought into the notion of universal preschool, whether we like the way it's structured or not, whether we appreciate sort of the lack of flexibility we have and the opportunity to serve the neediest of the students. It's sort of like, I don't know if you want to really mess up a good thing. And I'm trying to figure out how you sort of draw the distinction between the latitude and flexibility we want as a district who probably serves the largest number versus those who just have the funds to serve whoever comes in the door. And so I totally get where you want to go with this, but I also think we don't want to confuse the issue and put ourselves in a position where we're debating against ourselves. So I don't really know what the right approach is, but I'm trying to figure out if there is maybe another way to skin the cat. And I don't know that I know what that is tonight, but I don't want us to be pitted against ourselves to try to get to a different place with a population that isn't being served while we know that there are people who are being served with the status quo. So,
We do what they did in Oklahoma. They just changed
Yeah.
changed full funding eligibility from 5-year-old to 4-year-old. Didn't call it preschool at all. And then we started.
yeah,
All of a sudden.
yeah.
So is there, do we have any data on who is currently being served through our pre-K programs? Where is that available?
Oh, we can get you whatever you want.
We had
Answer
a presentation, I think, by Susie Guest. I would think it was summer, yeah, and that was rather informative, and you can pull it up on board docs or we can send it around.
Yeah,
But that shows you the different funding streams and what percentage they make up of our funding pool for early ed and numbers on kids served, where they are, things like that might be helpful to see.
Because I do hear your perspective, Terry, on, we have things in place, right? And we don't want to necessarily lose that. But I just keep thinking about the long term, right? We keep seeing data, right, week after week, and it's the data of the students who are struggling the most are low-income students of color, right? And I would bet, though I have yet to see this data, that that's reflected in who's being served, or maybe I'm starting to look at research over the effects of preschool education on long-term effects of students, down the line, but I would bet there's some correlation. And so I'm
Ms. Ellsworth?
Okay, so not sure if this is the appropriate time or not, but I'm going to bring it up for the record, that I'd like to request that, speaking of preschool as a reform effort, as I would like to see that added to our regular monitoring report schedule and to be looking at that data on a more regular basis. I just was part of, so Jesse Franklin Taylor has the Kellogg grant, and as part of my preschool role, I'm on a grant advisory committee. We just looked at the gold data from what's happening there. There are tremendous things happening with our preschools when things, given our the great format that Des Moines uses. But I do think we need to be looking at that more and more intentionally. So that is something that I wanted to lift up right now while I was thinking of it in the context of this discussion. So thank you.
I
a good
agree
point.
with that.
Anything further? All right, let's move to items of privilege. Chair's reports, first item of privilege. I will keep it brief and note that the board met this weekend to develop ourselves, and really I think had a very worthwhile and meaningful conversation about what our individual priorities are and what our full board priorities are, and are really, I think, moving down the line of really, I think, a great and I think a position through which we can be tremendously valuable and significant to educational progress of our kids. I also do want to note, too, the passing last week of a former school board member and educator, Mark Smith, past president of the Iowa Federation of Labor, past DMEA member, and someone who sat in one of these chairs many years ago, and I think a very strong, consistent, and typically profane voice on behalf of those most in need, and one of the, I think, people who believed the right things with every fiber of his body and put it into practice, and so he'll truly be missed. I'll turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
All right, I don't have a whole lot except to say that this is the last board meeting before the new year, so I would wish the board and our entire DMPS staff and students and families the very best holiday season, and look forward to seeing you all back after the break in January.
Okay, thank you. Nice note. And this meeting is adjourned.